Hello, this is video number 26, and it is chapter 5, section 5. And this is all about factoring by grouping. Okay, so we mentioned our last section was factoring out a GCF. And you should look to see if any problem ever has one if you're going to factor. So you're going to look for a GCF every time, all the time. No matter how many terms. Okay, and then after that, you're going to use different types of factoring. So this one, factoring with a GCF, can be done no matter what type of factoring you're going to do. It's kind of a blanket over all of them. And then if you have 4 terms in a problem, you're going to factor by grouping, which is what this one is. And then we're going to talk about how to factor with 3 terms and then with 2 terms. So the number of terms will determine the type of grouping you do. So again, 4 terms is when you're going to use this grouping. So what I'm going to do is go to a different screen. I'm going to write down all of the steps, kind of similar to what we did in a previous section. And then I'll split my screen. We'll look at the steps on one side and do the math on the other. Okay, so we're going to just jot these all down using different colors first. And so here are the steps to factor by grouping. And so step 1 is to start by writing 2 sets of parentheses with an addition sign in the middle between them. Okay, and remember, we're going to write all the steps and then we'll go back and actually do the math. So step 2, and I'll color code these so that we can color code them when we do the problem. We're going to put 2 terms into each set of parentheses and then if possible, it won't always work because sometimes it's going to be a 1. Each set of parentheses should contain a GCF. Okay, so we're utilizing what we did in the last one to do this. Step 3 is going to be to factor the GCF from each set. Out of each set of parentheses. And I just have a little comment here. The 2 remaining sets after this step is done should be exactly the same. They should be identical. If they aren't, you cannot go any further. So that's a second note. You can't go any further. So either you can't group or you need to go back to step 2 and change your terms or something like that, but you can't continue. Okay, so if those two are not identical, the yellow or orange step there, then you cannot continue. All right. Step 4, make that purple. You're going to factor out the identical quantity from step 3. And then that becomes a GCF, and you're just going to write your other two terms. They were your original GCFs, right? When you did this, is what those were. Write the remaining two terms, and then you're done. Okay, so these are actually not difficult at all. There's a lot of words, but once you understand what's happening, the math isn't too bad at all. So I am going to view dual page display. We're going to turn this on. We're going to add a screen, and we are going to write over here on the right-hand side. Excuse me. So here's the problem that we're going to start with. We're going to factor by grouping. Remember, you're doing this when you have 4 terms. Okay, and the first problem is 4ab plus 8b plus 5xa plus 10x. Okay? And so, step 1, we're going to start by writing 2 sets of parentheses with an addition sign between them. So 2 sets of parentheses, you're going to put binomials in each one with a plus sign in between them. Step 2, in blue, put 2 terms into each set of parentheses. Oftentimes, you can put your first 2 terms in the first set and your second 2 terms in the second step. Remember, though, over here on the left, you want each set of parentheses to contain a GCF. So if you kind of plan this out, if you use on the right now, the first 2 terms, do you have a GCF? Well, yes, you have a 4b. And if you use the right 2 terms, do you have a GCF? Well, yes, you have a 5x. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So 4ab plus 8b and 5xa plus 10x. All right, so step 3, green. Factor the GCF out of each set of parentheses. So here we said we're going to have a 4b that's going to come out. That's going to leave us with an a plus 2. And then keep the plus sign. And we're going to take a 5x out of this set of parentheses, leaving us with an a plus 2. And then yellow note over here. The 2 remaining sets of parentheses should be identical. And that's those guys. Those are the identical set. Step 4, factor out the identical quantity. So this looks like problems you had in your last section. You had, like, this is one term, right? And this is one term. And this is common to both, so you pull it out. And what do you have left over? Well, you have 4b plus 5x. And you're done. This is the answer. Okay, remember that you can always check these by multiplication. And I'll just do one really quick for you. If I multiply this guy out, I get 4ab plus 5ax plus 8b plus 10x. And they may not be in the same order, but 4ab, 4ab, 8b, 8b, 5xa, 5ax, they're the same terms. This one's just in alphabetical order, and this isn't, but it doesn't matter if you multiply 3 times 2 or 2 times 3, right? Multiplication doesn't matter which order they're in. And then a 10x and a 10x. So those match up identically, and we're going to go from there. All right, I'm going to try to lock this page over here on the right-hand side. I don't know if I know how to do that. View, dual page, pin the page. I'm going to pin this page. Okay, so now I'm going to add another screen, and I'm going to do another problem. All right, so we're going to factor by grouping. 9x cubed minus 18x squared plus x minus 2. All right, step 1, 2 sets of parentheses with a plus sign in between. Step 2, I'm going to factor out or write 2 terms in each parentheses that have a common factor. Well, I'm going to show you what would happen here if we take the first 2 and put them in here, and take these 2 terms and put them in here. All right, the first one there has a 9x squared we can take out, leaving us an x minus 2. Well, notice that this quantity and this quantity are the same. The one on the right-hand side doesn't have a GCF, but that means that you could actually pull a 1 out of it without changing anything, right? Because 1 times anything is anything. So now the quantity is common. You have the same identical quantity, which is what we're going to write first in our answer. And what's left over are the 2 GCFs that came out of there. Okay? So that is something you may see where you have to just take a 1 out of a quantity, and this would be the answer. Again, I'm not going to multiply and check. You get the idea from the last one. All right, the next problem. Oops. Next problem. Factor by grouping. I want to show you, similar to the last one, x cubed minus 4x squared plus x minus 4. All right, so start with 2 sets of parentheses with a plus sign in between. And in this one, I'm actually going to take my x cubed and my x and put that in the first set of parentheses. And always make sure you put them in these parentheses in the order that they're in the problem in. So this one would come first, the x cubed, because it comes first in the problem, and then the x. Well, that's going to leave us these 2 terms, negative 4x squared minus 4. All right, so my first quantity has an x as a GCF, so that would give me x squared plus 1. Don't forget the plus 1. Remember, you have to be able to redistribute and get what you started with. And then also recall, I don't know if I mentioned this, when we did a GCF, if you have a leading negative term, your GCF should be negative. So GCF should be negative if the leading term is negative. Varsity isn't super picky about that, but it will really mess you up here if you don't do this. So we're going to factor out a negative 4, because I can take that out of both of these. And then just be careful when you do that, because if I take a negative 4, I'm dividing here, right, by my GCF. So now I have negative 4 divided by negative 4. Those would cancel each other, leaving me x squared. And negative 4 divided by negative 4 is a plus 1. So your signs actually change in here when you factor out a negative, right? So then in my last step, I'm going to take my common quantity. That's going to come out first. And then I'm going to have x minus 4, and that's coming from my 2 GCFs. And there's my answer. Okay? And that's it for grouping. Remember, 4 terms. I mean, technically you can do it with 6, but I don't have any of my classes do that in high school. I'd keep that for a college problem. All right. Toodaloo.